A love beyond the past, the beginning of the end. Ethan sat in his dimly lit lab, his fingers hovering over the controls of the device that had consumed the last decade of his life. Time travel was real, but its use was restricted to minor corrections, never for personal gain or altering history in significant ways. But Ethan was about to break those rules. Staring at an old photograph, his heart ached for Maria, the girl he had loved and lost when they were just teenagers. He could still remember that night vividly, the screech of the tires, the rain-soaked streets, and her lifeless body. The world moved on, but Ethan never did. Now, with his breakthrough, he had the power to go back, to fix what had gone wrong. But there was a cost, and not just the law. Changing one event could ripple through time, reshaping not only his life, but the lives of millions. Could he risk it? Did Maria's life mean more than the timeline itself? With a deep breath, Ethan activated the machine. Lights flickered, and the room seemed to fold in on itself. Time was fluid, malleable, and for the first time, he was no longer bound by its rules. He closed his eyes, feeling the world spin around him, and when he opened them, he was standing in the middle of a familiar street. It was a sunny afternoon in the small town he had grown up in. His younger self, just 17, was sitting on the steps of the school, and there she was, Maria, laughing with her friends, her dark hair catching the light, her eyes full of the joy and hope that would soon be snuffed out. Ethan's heart raced. This was his chance. He could save her. But how could he do it without raising suspicion? Without altering too much of the timeline? Meeting the past, Ethan approached Maria, keeping his distance. He knew everything about this day, the moments leading up to her accident. The careless driver that wouldn't see her crossing the street. But how could he warn her without sounding crazy? And would she even believe a stranger? "Hey," he called out. She turned, and for a moment, he was transported back to all the memories they had shared. She looked at him, confused. "Do I know you?" He had to act fast. "Not yet. But I need to tell you something important." Maria's smile faltered, and she took a step back, glancing at her friends. "What is this about?" Ethan panicked. Every second he delayed was bringing the accident closer. "Please, just trust me. Don't cross the street today. Stay away from that corner." He pointed toward the intersection where it would happen. She frowned, unsure if this was some sort of prank. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "You will," he whispered, fighting the urge to tell her everything. But then a thought struck him. What if by saving her, he changed the course of his entire life, his future self? What if this small alteration unraveled his very existence? The weight of time. As the sun began to set, Ethan watched Maria from a distance. She had stayed away from the street corner, but the weight of his decision bore down on him. He had altered history, and now he had to live with the consequences. He returned to his time machine, but before he could initiate the return, a sudden wave of uncertainty hit him. What had he just done? Would Maria still be a part of his future? Would they even meet again? He couldn't help but wonder about the butterfly effect his actions might have triggered. With a sense of dread, Ethan activated the machine once more. The changed future. Ethan returned to his present time, but something was different. His lab was intact, but everything felt off. He rushed to his computer and scanned the news, searching for any evidence of his interference. The accident hadn't happened. Maria had lived. But as he scrolled through the records of his life, he saw something that chilled him to the core. His wife. Ani and his unborn child no longer existed in this timeline. In saving Maria, he had erased the life he had built. The promise. Torn between the two timelines, Ethan realized he couldn't have both worlds. He had saved Maria, but at the cost of the future he had grown to love. He thought about Ani, the life they had shared, the child they had hoped for. Would Maria even be the same person now? Would she still be the girl he had loved so deeply? Or had time twisted their fate into something unrecognizable? In the end, he had to make a choice. He could return once more and set things right, letting fate take its original course. But he would have to live with the knowledge that Maria was gone forever. Or he could stay in this altered world, where she lived, but at the cost of everything else he cherished. Standing at the crossroads of time, Ethan made a promise to himself. No matter what path he chose, he would live with no regrets. Because time, no matter how much it bent or twisted, could never take away the memories of those he had loved. And with that, Ethan stepped back into the machine, knowing that this would be his final journey through time. The final journey. As Ethan programmed the coordinates for his final journey, the weight of his decision pressed down on him like never before. He paused for a moment, looking at the control panel. The machine hummed quietly, waiting for his command. Time travel was supposed to be a gift, a tool for correcting mistakes. But in his case, it had become a curse, a never-ending spiral of impossible choices. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. If he returned to the past once again and allowed Maria's accident to happen, he could restore the life he had built with Ani, the woman he now loved, and their unborn child. But if he stayed in this timeline, he would have to live without them and face the consequences of an unknown future with Maria, who might not even recognize him anymore. Finally, he made the choice. Ethan set the time coordinates back to the moment just before he had first intervened. He couldn't allow himself to lose Ani. He couldn't erase the child they had dreamed of raising together. His love for Maria would always be there, but it belonged in the past. The undoing. When Ethan stepped out of the machine, he was once again standing on the familiar street corner. Mere moments before the accident, he watched from the shadows as his younger self sat on the steps of the school, lost in thought, completely unaware of the tragedy about to unfold. It took every ounce of willpower not to rush over to Maria, not to stop her from crossing the street. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched her approach the intersection. This time, he didn't intervene. He let fate play out. The sound of screeching tires filled the air, followed by a sickening crash. Ethan winced, tears streaming down his face as he watched the scene unfold. Maria was gone, just as she had been before. The timeline was restored, and with it, so was his future with Ani. The price of sacrifice. Ethan returned to the present, but the world felt heavier now. His lab was the same, his research intact, and Ani's presence filled the room. He had chosen her, chosen the life they had created together. But the memory of Maria lingered like a ghost, always present, haunting the corners of his mind. Ani entered the room, her soft smile calming him. "You've been working so hard," she said, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Come take a break. The baby's been kicking." Ethan smiled through the pain in his heart. "I'll be right there," he replied, watching her leave the room. He knew he had made the right decision. He couldn't trade the love he had for Ani, nor the future of their child. But part of him would always wonder what if. A love beyond time. As the years passed, Ethan learned to live with the echoes of the past. He and Ani welcomed their child into the world. A little girl with Ani's eyes and his curious nature. Life was good, but it was never without its moments of quiet reflection. Maria was gone, yet she was always with him. In the choices he made, in the life he had chosen. Ethan never spoke of the time travel device again. He dismantled it, burying its secrets deep in his lab, never to be used again. He knew the risks, the temptations, and the consequences too well. Time had taught him a harsh but necessary lesson. Some things are meant to stay as they are, even if it breaks your heart. But in those rare moments, when the world was quiet and his family slept, he would take out that old photograph of Maria and whisper a silent apology, a promise to never forget the love they had shared, a love that existed beyond time, even though it could never be. And in the end, Ethan found peace, not in rewriting the past, but in accepting the present, knowing that love, whether lost or found, was eternal. Epilogue. Years later, Ethan's daughter found her way into his lab, rummaging through the old files and papers. Among them, she stumbled upon a photograph of a young woman. Maria, she didn't recognize the name or the face, but something about the photo made her pause. She brought it to her father, curiosity brimming in her eyes. "Dad, who's this?" she asked. Ethan looked at the picture and smiled sadly. "Someone I once knew," he said softly, taking the photo from her. "Someone who changed my life." His daughter nodded, sensing the depth of his words, but not fully understanding. She left the lab, leaving Ethan alone with the memories once again. He looked at the photograph one last time before placing it in a drawer, closing it for good. Some things were meant to stay in the past, and that was okay. The promise had been kept. Reflections in time. Years passed, and Ethan's daughter, now a teenager, grew more curious about her father's past. She had always sensed a quiet melancholy in him, a piece of his heart that seemed tucked away, beyond her reach. She couldn't shake the feeling that the photograph of Maria held more meaning than he had let on. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from the porch, she finally asked, "Dad, you never talk about your life before Mom. Was it hard for you? You seem like you're carrying something." Ethan sighed, staring out at the horizon. His daughter had grown into someone so perceptive, so thoughtful, traits he admired, but sometimes found unnerving. She was more like him than he'd realized. Everyone has parts of their past that they hold close. "For better or worse," he replied carefully. "Was she someone you loved?" she asked, her voice soft, her eyes searching his. Ethan's heart clenched. He didn't want to burden her with the complexities of his time-altering past, but perhaps it was time to share some of the truth. "Yes," he said quietly. "Maria was someone I loved very much, but our time together ended a long time ago." His daughter looked at him with understanding beyond her years. "Do you still think about her?" "I do," he admitted, "but not in the way you might think. I made peace with the past. Maria is part of who I am, but she's not the reason I live in the present. That's because of you and your mom." The burden of secrets. Though Ethan had shared a sliver of his past with his daughter, the full weight of the secret remained locked away. There were days when the temptation to reveal the truth gnawed at him about the time travel, about the choice he had made. But what good would it do? Knowing the pain he carried wouldn't change the love he had for his family. It wouldn't undo the sacrifice. One evening, while Annie was reading in bed and their daughter was asleep, Ethan found himself drawn back to his lab. Though the time travel machine had been dismantled, the remnants of his research still cluttered the room papers. Equations, schematics. He sat at the old desk and pulled out his journal. For the first time in years, he wrote, "Time is an unforgiving force. It gives us no second chances, except the ones we steal. I stole one, and in doing so, I lost everything I once held dear, only to gain something greater. But even now, I wonder, what if I had taken the other path? Could I have lived with the consequences?" He paused, staring at the page. The truth was, he didn't have an answer. Even after all this time, part of him still longed for the life he might have had with Maria, but he knew, deep down, that the life he had built now with Ani and their daughter was the one worth keeping. The unexpected discovery. One afternoon, years later, Ethan's daughter was in the attic searching for some old family heirlooms when she came across a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a small, weathered box. Curious, she opened it to find old letters, some photographs, and a series of strange diagrams. At the bottom of the box was a worn journal, filled with meticulous notes and sketches about time travel. Her heart raced as she thumbed through the pages, piecing together fragments of her father's forgotten work. It all seemed impossible, yet something in her gut told her that this was real. Was her father somehow connected to this discovery of time travel? That night, she confronted Ethan with the journal in hand. "Dad, what is this? Did you really invent a time machine?" Ethan's heart stopped. He had never meant for her to find out. He sat her down, struggling to find the right words. "It's not as simple as it looks," he began, his voice heavy with the weight of years of secrecy. She looked at him with wide eyes, a mixture of disbelief and awe. "Did you use it?" Ethan nodded slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment. He couldn't lie any more. "Yes, I used it, but I only did it once, and I made a choice that changed everything." His daughter sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the enormity of what he had just revealed. "What did you change?" Ethan's eyes filled with emotion. "I tried to save someone I loved, but in doing so, I realized that I couldn't have the life I have now if I changed the past. So I let things happen the way they were meant to." Acceptance. Ethan's daughter sat quietly for a long time, processing her father's story. "So, you gave up something to have us," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his heart aching as he relived the memory. "Yes, I did, and I would do it again, 1,000 times over." She reached over and took his hand. "I'm glad you did. I don't think I could have lived without you." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his decision lift just a little. He had made the hardest choice a person could make between two lives, between two loves. But now, sitting here with his daughter, he realized that he had made the right one. In the end, time hadn't taken Maria from him. She had become part of the fabric of his life, woven into the very choices that had brought him here to this moment. His love for her hadn't vanished. It had simply transformed, becoming something that lived on in the love he had for his family. Ethan smiled through his tears, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. "Some things are worth letting go," he said quietly, "and some things are worth holding on to." And with that, the chapter of Maria in his life was finally closed, not with sadness, but with a sense of understanding. Time had taken many things from him, but it had also given him the greatest gift of all, a future worth living for.